Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Rumeet Billan. It is such a pleasure and honor to welcome Julie Coffman from Bain Co. Julie, thank you so much for taking time to spend with us today.
Rumeet, I'm super excited about it. Looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
I can't wait to hear your responses to our fireside chat questions, and I want to get right into it. So my first question is this. Now, in 2009, you were the founding chair of Bain's Global Women's Leadership Council. Can you please take us back to that time? What encouraged you and pushed you to launch this initiative?
Yeah, I remember it so clearly, actually. We've been having, like, Women at Bain program had been alive and well for my entire career. And I've been at Bain now almost 30 years. But it was very local and grassroots, and it was based on building community at the local level. But in the early 2000s, we started looking and we were just stalling out in terms of growing our female talent all the way into the partnership, to the point where we were running a bunch of numbers and put it in front of the worldwide managing partner and said, this is just not where we need to be. We're only at 9% of our global partnership is female, and yet the world's talent is much more 50-50, if not more than that. We need to do something. And so the call to action was, let's put together a group of leaders and treat this like a true strategic imperative for Bain, and look at it the same way we would like a client problem. Do some analytics, do some problem solving, think about the root causes and the interventions we could come up with. And so that was how this got started. The worldwide managing partner at the time, Steve Ellis, asked me if I'd lead that group. We put together a group of about 10 of us to get started on really exploring what we could do to massively inflect the number of women in our partnership.
I love that. It started off as being very data driven, and that's so important. And I love that that's what helped to launch that initiative. Now, it has been over a decade, 2009. How has the work of the council evolved over that time?
It's been an incredible journey. So at the beginning, as I was saying, it was fact finding, right? And it was trying to figure out what interventions might matter. And I would say after the first kind of 6, 12, 18 months, we tested and learned a variety of different things, but we settled on sort of 3 tranches of work that really mattered and carry us through even today. So the first was all about our recruitment processes and making sure that our senior women were highly visible and highly celebrated throughout the process. We didn't want our women just talking about work-life balance or just talking about being a parent. We needed them talking about the way they were, really driving client results and being seen as leading key accounts and be on campus and be on podcasts and all sorts of things. So we wanted to get our women out there. The second was around sponsorship and recognizing the difference between a coach and a mentor and a true sponsor, and that women were not naturally getting that kind of advocacy, that type of situation where a male leader or a female leader, but often a male leader, would be advocating on your behalf when you weren't even in the room. And it was happening more naturally between our male colleagues. And so we wanted to put into place some training, some awareness, and a true formalized program to help those sponsorship relationships get born, get nested, and then grow. The third tranche was all about our everyday experience and the culture. One of the things that I would say is most critical is that we needed to make sure that our women felt like they were full participants the whole process, and that they were working for leaders and colleagues that were supportive and were inviting them in and that had their back and that wanted them to take risks. And so building the right culture, the right mindset, the right everyday behaviors that are more inclusive and that are more supportive was another critical element. And so as the years went on, I'm really proud of where we've gotten to. I mentioned we were 9% of our global partnership was female, and it's well up over 14 now, which may not seem like a lot. But given I can't stop hiring and promoting all the men, you have to catch up in a way that it takes a lot of effort. But even more than that, we broadened our horizons and said it's actually not enough just to focus on the partnership. We got to focus on our total leadership team, our managers and our associate partners. And there we've seen even more growth, where we're pushing towards our goal of 25% of that group being globally female, and we're getting really close. We're over that in several geographies. We have a little bit of a gap in some others, but a lot of progress there. And what folks talk about, I think, is that sponsorship and culture initiatives work hand in hand to creating more role models, more examples of how you could be successful as a woman at Bain that didn't all look the same. And that created confidence for more people to see themselves in leadership and in driving great results.
I love what you're saying because if we want to shift culture, it actually starts with those day to day, the
100%.
climate of the organization, what we're doing, our interactions, how we communicate, those day to day interactions, they matter so much. And I love that you spoke about celebrating women. And far too often, we don't do that. We don't celebrate each other. We don't lift each other up. And it's so, so critical. So thank you. And yes, there is a difference between sponsorship and mentorship. And so those three areas, so powerful. And we know that inclusion is important to Bain Co. Now, why should it be important to not just private sector companies, but to everyone?
Yeah, I mean, inclusion is the absolute groundwater, if you will. It's how all of us can thrive and sustain. And frankly, I mean, I know we're talking mostly about gender today, but if you think about racial equity, if you think about all sorts of inclusion, all sorts of groups that have been marginalized in the past, this sense of not just being included, but actually I'll extend it to belonging and being felt like you're embraced and being felt like that actually there's a place for you to be your full authentic self and to be able to contribute at the top of your license, so to speak, the top of your capabilities. Because gathering diverse talent together, but not creating an inclusive environment where they can thrive is a waste of time because you gather the talent and then it exits out the back door. I mean, it's not going to stay, none of us are going to stay in a place if you don't feel like you can be included, you can you can make a contribution, you can be recognized, you can be celebrated, and you can feel like you belong. And what we've also learned so much about is that when you are a minority, again, gender, ethnic, racial, what have you, you enter any system where there's a majority culture with a deficit of belonging kind of out of the gates. You have to be really invited in. Whereas if you're a member of the majority culture and you enter a new system, I don't think you feel that deficit in that same way. And so being mindful of ways to cultivate belonging early, because that creates level of trust in the system and a level of support that's there. And without belonging, support, and trust, you're just not going to get full potential out of anybody or the full potential of those diverse teams that we all know can create great breakthroughs for any of the work we're doing.
I don't know about all of you who are listening right now, but you can see I am continuously shaking and nodding my head. This idea of belonging. And if you look at the true definition of social connectedness, belonging is at the core of that. And so
Right.
when we look at what we're experiencing right now, even in pandemic, it's how do we create social connectedness? It's by creating those communities of belonging. And Julie, to your point about trust, oftentimes we think it's about building trust, but it's not. It's about earning trust
Yep.
and earning the trust of others. And we can do that through belonging. Now, in your experience, what would you say makes for truly inclusive workspaces?
That is a great question. And I'm guessing that all of us can think of times in our lives at school, at a club, or at a sports team, or at a workplace where you either did or didn't feel included. And I do feel like for me, like in the workplace setting, the manager, the person leading the given team sets the tone. And oftentimes we talk about what are the ground rules or what are the expectations. So if you take a moment as a team to have shared values and shared expectations as the team's getting set up, and make sure that it's a conversation where the leader is maybe putting forward, look, these are our objectives, or this is the way I like to work, or this is what needs to happen to get to the output. But what we need to do is talk about how are we collectively going to harness the gifts and the energies we have to do that. So let's hear from all of us on, hey, do you like to work more in the evening or in the morning? Or are you more of an email or a text person? I think those things, just being asking the question and trying to find common modes of working starts to create a sense of belonging because you're signaling that my preferences matter or my experiences. And even if it doesn't always go my way, because if everybody else wants to work in the morning and I like to sleep in, I might have to give on that one, but at least there's this dialogue of that. So I think that's part one. I think part two is creating space for people to contribute. At Bain, we do all our work in teams. And there's going to be those of us that are more extroverted or more introverted. You guys can probably tell I'm more on the extroverted side. So I don't usually have a hard time getting my share of voice. But the truth is, I create an inclusive environment if I make sure everybody has that moment to contribute or to talk. I go around that I'm actively soliciting input and participation such that it is not just allowing people that are a little bit more reticent to slip by. And then I think third is feeling like there's someone that cares for you or like has your back, I think is a good litmus test as to whether or not people are feeling included. Is there someone on the team that I think has my back? And so we try and utilize some of these questions on inclusion in our worldwide employee surveys and in our pulse checks in our various employee feedback mechanisms, because we know that if folks aren't feeling included, the contributions and the quality of the interactions are going to start to suffer.
Absolutely. And you've also now made me feel better for waking up at 3:45 a.m., starting work at 4 a.m. Eastern time and finishing at 2:30. So thank you so
There
much
you
for
go.
that.
Yeah.
And the reason is because I have a 4-year-old son, and that works in this circumstance and context for me at this moment. Is it the most optimal? Maybe, maybe not, but that's what's working. And let's build on that a little bit, because we know that pandemic has had an impact on women in the workplace. We know there are many articles and studies out there, and a recent headline even said that 1 in 4 women are either considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers. So what do you think in terms of how companies can respond to this challenge?
It is a huge challenge, and we do think about it for women for sure. I think about it, frankly, for all young parents. And I think a big point of this has been trying to create more equality and expectation across all parents, whether it's a male female combination, a male male, female female, whatever it is. We need to have co-parenting wherever it's possible. But to your question in particular, I think companies have been responding by trying to do a few things. Number one, we've got to make sure that our workers have some supports and some flexibility to be able to deal with this remote work from home situation. I know in the US, we have many, many of our kids still doing remote school. So now all of a sudden you have working parents that are expected to also somehow oversee remote schooling, and it's just impossible. And so trying to create flexible hours, trying to have a little bit more understanding of when you might need to have some downtime or some time off to regroup, I think is an important element. Now, that look, the truth is, all of that requires advantage or some privilege. Not everybody can do that. And so I think what companies are also trying to do is think about, are there ways that we can have teams or different job shares or other ways that folks can be more creative on how to get to an end goal? If we used to always do it by these 3 people being on site all the time, but now no one can be, how do we use this 5-person team with technology to accomplish some similar goals? So we're seeing some creativity and agility and some resilience, but I think what really needs to be present the whole time is ongoing dialogue about how are you doing, what supports can we provide, and how can we be innovative in thinking about doing things differently, because the world has changed on us and we can't rely on some of the old structures that we had before. It's not going to be easy, but I think I've also been asked sometimes, do you think that people are going to go backwards? Because it's going to be too darn hard to keep having diversity and keep having inclusion. And I think the opposite is true. I think companies are realizing that the more they made their workers feel like they had their back and they supported them through this pandemic, the more dedicated they became to the organization and the more they could count on the collective trying to pull together, because they felt like it was trying to do the right thing for an organization that had been helping them do the right thing. So I think that continuing to invest in inclusion and creating a sense of belonging will sustain, and will be going through this time for the companies that are really doing it right.
Brilliant. And Julie, I can talk to you forever, but I have one last question for you. And looking ahead, what gives you hope that we can reach a gender equal future?
Gosh, gender equal is a big one, and I would love to have that hope. But what gives me hope, I guess, is a few things. Number one, I think the progress to date is amazing, and I think that when you really look at the composition of leadership teams and of governments, you're seeing progress. I saw a great graphic. I don't remember the source. I wish I did right now, but earlier in the pandemic, where there was the 8 countries that were having the best outcomes were all led by women leaders. I mean, I think eventually people are going to get the memo that we know what we're doing up here. But like in all seriousness, I think the recognition that so much of the world's talent and so much of the world's creativity is female led, and that actually we are going to have to continue to create structures and opportunities and dialogues to bring that talent together, and that those organizations that are truly about innovation and breakthrough and new frontiers and creating new ideas will harness the best talent together to do that. Now, I don't know what we'll see in my lifetime, but I am hopeful that we're going to get closer and closer.
I am hopeful as well. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, Julie Coffman, Bain Co. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with all of us today. Take
Thank
good
you,
care.
Rumeet. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
Bye.